Good morning.
There seems to be a lot of things going on here. So let's start, shall we, with car crime first of all. Sarah, what happened with car crime?
Yeah, so I think in the book we talk about how it was incredibly high, and there were a lot of car thefts, and particularly in particular states like Western Australia. I guess we offer a couple of explanations for why it's gone down. And number one was the introduction of engine immobilizers, and secondly was the introduction of microdots, which often in many and random places around a car's parts, with the vehicle identification number, the VIN. So if a car was stolen, parts were sort of taken apart and stolen,
Mm,
it could be detected. So it's regulatory things like that were a big improvement,
mm.
caused a big improvement in car thefts. And there was also a shrinking market for stolen goods.
Ah, I see. And Dawn, what about when it came to levels of violence? What affected those levels and brought them down, do you think?
Well, depends upon whether you're talking about assault or talking about robbery. Robbery began falling when what's now known as the heroin drought took place around Christmas 2000 in Australia. The price of heroin skyrocketed and the purity of it dropped dramatically. And a lot of people were committing robberies to raise money to buy heroin.
Mm,
So there was a mass migration off into treatment. A lot of people gave up using heroin, and the robbery rate fell down with that. But of course, later on, there were transformations in the economy. So, for example, people these days are much less likely to carry cash. So that reduces the rewards associated with robbery. Assault is a completely different story. That started coming down in 2008 when young people stopped drinking as much as they had previously. And sexual assault, tragically to say, has not shown any kind of decline as yet, which is quite in contrast to the UK, where all of those violent crimes seem to have come down.
mm. And what about, Sarah, the demographic of the population as well? How has that had a bearing on crime levels, do you think, in terms of people's age and people's income?
Well, I think the first thing is that we have there's an aging population in Australia, so the group of people who are in those age brackets that are most likely to offend is shrinking. So there's sort of fewer crimes because of that, but also the younger generations are not committing as much crime, and so and in terms of income, there's also been an increase in the rates of employment, and real income has risen. So it's kind of a few things. Yeah, those are kind of the main demographic reasons, I guess.
And Don, what about prison as well? The deterrent effect of prison. Did that have any effect, would you say, on the crime rate?
Well, it's probably had some effect because the best studies suggest that prison does have an effect on crime, but most of the drop in crime occurred before the big increase in imprisonment rates. The drop in crime really was more or less over between, or by 2011, it was going down incrementally. The prison rate went up slowly between 2000 and 2010, but really started rising after 2011. So there's a mismatch between the rapid rise in imprisonment and the decline in crime. So we would estimate it probably accounts for at most 4 to 5% of the drop in crime.
Mm. And what about government policies, Dawn? What kind of effect or impact do you think they have had over the last 18 years or so?
Well, government policy, I think, has had a big effect, but not so much government policy on law and order. As Sarah was saying, the mandatory introduction of engine immobilizers, laws which made it impossible to pawn or sell stolen goods without proof of identity and proof of ownership, that made a big difference. The laws that changed the arrangements for mobile phones so that you could cancel the subscriber module, whatever it is,
Mm.
after a phone was stolen, made it basically worthless to steal mobile phones. So governments have been enacting these regulations that weren't really designed to stop crime so much, but actually had quite a big effect. And the most recent one is the Lockout Laws. So the government introduced laws that required licensed premises in certain areas to close much earlier than they had previously. And that was associated with a big drop in assault.
I suppose what I'm interested in is the headline. The headline figures here are really fascinating because, as I said in the beginning, in the year 2000, Australia had the highest rate of violent offences in a survey of 25 countries, but 18 years later, crime rate had fallen by 60%, which sounds like crime levels are low. But in 2018 or in 2020, maybe 2020 is not the best year to look at. But if you look at more recent years, Sara, what are current crime levels like objectively in Australia now? I mean, they sound like they are low, but compared to other countries, are they?
Well, they're a lot lower than they used to be, and I think that's the kind of point about this book. It's not that crime is gone, but rather that it fell quite dramatically, but also from a very high base. So I think that's a very good way to think about it. Certainly, that high base at the time, Australia was highest among many developed countries, and yeah, I think the point of the book is actually to look at how a lot of factors which were Australia specific led to that kind of drop.